Hello and welcome to Jesuit 101. Father Dan Joyce, and I'm here as we explore a little bit more our mission as a Jesuit and Catholic university at St. Joseph's University. I'm here joined by two wonderful experts on Jesuit education and what the very basics and essentials are of that Jesuit education. I'm here with Dr. Cheryl McConnell, who's the president of St. Joseph's, and Father Tom Brennan, who is in our English department as an associate professor of English. And all of us are going to talk a little bit about, from our own perspective, where and how we see the very essential and necessary parts of Jesuit education, both in the past, in the present, and even in the future. So I'll begin with just a little overview of how Jesuit education is right now in this current time of ours with regards to where it is. Of course, it's arguably the oldest and largest educational network in the world. There are about 2.3 million students currently today attending Jesuit schools of all sorts in about 80 countries. And there are maybe about a little over 3,200 different schools that are sponsored by the Society of Jesus, otherwise known as the Jesuits. And of those schools, they could be as different as schools that have just started almost instantly in the last few months through the Jesuit Refugee Service, where the Jesuits have a long 60-year commitment to accompanying refugee populations. But in those places, almost always, the Jesuits will open up schools so that children can continue to learn in those difficult circumstances. So they could be very basic primary schools or schools for adult education right in almost those crisis situations. But they could also be longstanding schools at the highest level of education, such as the Assad Business School in Barcelona, or the medical school that the Jesuits opened some years ago in the country of Chad, and many, many other schools, almost a school of every type, that if the particular situation in that particular place and time requires a type of education, the Jesuits are interested, and the Jesuit Educational Network is willing to work together across all of the existing current schools and networks to offer some education to meet the needs of those students. And that's where I would begin by saying that I think Jesuit education, no matter where it is or who it is designed for, always offers a focus on the learning of the student, the individual gifts of that student, and that student's ability to take those gifts and not only develop them to the fullest potential for themselves and their own personal success, but also to make an impact on their society, their community, and our world in general. That Jesuit education has these two goals of personal, important development of talents and gifts that we think the world needs, every individual's unique talents and gifts, and that those talents and gifts can always be used and will be used for the good of the individual and the communities they're a part of, and ultimately to create a world in which people can thrive and people can be the best that they possibly can be, and that everybody has an opportunity to be a part of that project of making the world a better place where thriving of all sorts is allowed by everyone. So I'm just going to give you that general introduction and turn it over to my colleagues here from St. Joseph's to give their perspective. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McConnell, if you could share us a little bit about your experience of Jesuit education.
Thank you. Let me start with the story. Some of you may have heard the story before, but many on the call may be new. I first went to teach at a Jesuit university, and in my experience of understanding what a Jesuit education is and what a Jesuit university is came from my first day of faculty orientation. And we went around the room and we talked about, well, what do we hope and what do we desire to be? And of course, I came from corporate America, and I came from a large CPA firm. And I said, as an accounting professor, I want our students to have the best pass rate in the state on the CPA exam. And of course, people nodded their heads and thought, that's great. Rigor, it's a really important high mark for Jesuit education. And then at a break, one of the Jesuits pulled me aside and he said, Cheryl, is that all you hope for your students? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, don't you want them to be better, to be different, to think deeper, to contribute more? And that was my first introduction to that there's more to Jesuit higher education than just academic rigor and toughness and really good quality professional success. And so as part of that explanation for the next 30 years, 35 years that now I've been in Jesuit higher education, I've learned a lot more about all of the elements to it. Very quickly, learned how the teaching is different at a Jesuit institution. And teaching at a Jesuit institution, you care deeply about the context and the students and where they come from and what they've been experiencing and where they are in the place so that you can tailor that education based on the context of that. And that's very consistent with when Jesuits go into communities. They don't go into communities to take it over and evangelize. They are companions in that. And so we're companions in this educational journey. And then Jesuit education is deep on really engaging the students in meaningful ways. And so it's the engagement and then the reflection and the action for service for good. And all of those together are called Ignatian pedagogy. And that's the approach that we take again and again and again in the classroom. And it's how it distinguishes us as teachers of Jesuit institutions. Over the years then, I became really well-versed in the core values of a Jesuit higher education institution and all Jesuit apostolates, quite frankly. And I'm not going to use the Latin words for it, because sometimes that's not approachable, but I'll talk about it in everyday language and the values that mean something to me and how it impacts my leadership. One of the things that's really important to me is that I seek to see the divine in all things. And it's the divine in the students that we teach, the divine in the earth that we share. And so looking at that through that lens. Of course, we talk a lot here at St. Joe's about magis, and magis means more, but it doesn't mean more in quantity. It means deeper. It means going extra and taking that deeper look at things. I have the habit of reflection, so that every evening or every morning I do an examine, which talks to me about, well, when did the day go well, and why was that for me, and what was I at my best, and then when was I not at my best, and how do I change that for the day going forward, and how do I think about that? Another thing that's really important for us is service, and it's service rooted in justice and love. A lot of universities have service projects. Ours are different. We're companioning with and for others. And that with is extremely important, that it's not just we're serving others. We are companions in that context of understanding and participating and accompanying to make a difference in the world. So you see all of that together reflected in our mission statement for St. Joseph's. And it talks about personal excellence, professional success, and engaged citizenship. All three of those together distinguish us as a university, and it guides how I lead the institution.
Well, thanks, Dr. McConnell. I appreciate the way in which, both as a faculty member and now an administrator for some years, and personally, you've taken from this approach to education and from the many values, things that are an integral part of your life. Maybe looking a little more specifically at the role of faculty, and especially for how scholarship and research also fits into the world of Jesuit education. Father Tom Brennan, you want to share with us a little bit of your perspective?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you too, Cheryl, for what you're saying. I resonate with everything you're saying. I brought along two props. Conveniently enough, they are ones that I was using in class this morning, my copy of William Shakespeare's Complete Works. And my notes from the same class that this book came from, just because I won't say how, well, it's 1981, when I was in college, long time. These notes went with learning Shakespeare at the time. And Father Jim Devereaux was my teacher. He was a really powerful example for me that's come back to me lately, just in the process of thinking about how to teach King Lear, Shakespeare's play King Lear, this year. Because Father Devereaux actually, for a good part of his career, he was a tenured faculty member at Chapel Hill, North Carolina for many, many years. Then he was asked to come back he came to Georgetown, where I was an undergraduate, and he taught in our undergraduate program there. And then later, as you would remember, Dan, he was our provincial superior, eventually passed away over here at Manresa Hall. The thing that is what I've been doing is I literally have been able to use some of my notes for teaching King Lear in class these days. And I took the notebook out and I put it up on the document camera in our class, and I put my book with my annotations in it as a way to help the kids to see that this is something they can do. They find Shakespeare, and I do too, quite frankly, to be a very challenging text for them. These are freshmen, and yet doing that, I think they get engaged a little bit more with some of the personal that you were just talking about a minute ago. I also make a point of talking about it as something that was passed on to me by another Jesuit, and that I'm trying now to pass on to them. The other thing that I think is important with all this, and that I find valuable, is that this personal investment, I believe very, very strongly, is integral to what we understand just Catholic education to be generally. I don't think Catholic education works unless you have people recognizing that this is more than a job. I'm a product of Catholic schools most of my life. I went to Catholic grade school almost entirely, a Catholic high school, and then to Georgetown for my undergraduate, not to mention Jesuit training. I did then, however, go to Brandeis University for my doctorate. What drew me to the Jesuits was that on the one hand, you have this rootedness in the church and in its tradition, but you also have, I believe, a comfort with moving outside of that in a lot of ways and embracing the culture as it is. And I remember when I was looking to join the Jesuits back in 1984, one of the things that I was asked about, what drew me to the Jesuits, well, I had had Father Devereux and other Jesuits when I was in college, but what drew me to them was adaptability. That the Jesuits, and I'm not, please don't hear this as congratulating ourselves, but I do believe that the model that was presented to me and that I have always found compelling is the model of we go into the culture as it is. We understand the culture on its terms. And I find that I'm doing that, I've been doing that here for 25 years. And it's very often a secular culture. And I don't see secular as a bad thing. I see it as a very, very good thing. I teach English. I wrote a book on, I think about 50 people bought on psychoanalytic theory in literature. It's about as far away from religion sometimes as you can get. But I was very engaged by theory and the fact that it was in some ways so distant from what I had grown up with. And I felt always that there was a real gift in learning about that nuance. And I try to impart that today. So.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think you're right. I think it's an old tradition, as I said, 477 years, this Jesuit educational tradition, and it has always had that impetus from the Jesuits in the spiritual exercises that you go into the reality or into the context, as Dr. McConnell was saying, you go into it as it is and take it on its own terms so that then you can start to say, okay, where do we see the sign of the divine? Where do we see God working in the world? Where do we see this, as St. Ignatius would have put it, this full embrace of all creation, to take it seriously and know that it's a gift, but it's a gift for us to use responsibly. So from the very beginning, both the Jesuits and ultimately the Jesuit educational system that Ignatius and his followers set up took that whole sense of the current reality, the world as it is, and the context, the particular needs of the context. So it's this kind of timeless tradition, whereas I think Father Brennan pointed out, you can use termed and well effective old methods of teaching. And I'm not saying your methods are old, Tom. I don't want to say that. But there is some stuff that is timeless and is effective even with the new generation. And yet knowing, as Tom pointed out, that you do that with the idea of how do we maybe use some of that in order to get through to a new generation that finds this a little difficult or different. So another question I would have too, and some of our folks have sent in some suggestions, and maybe Dr. McConnell, you can answer this. Where do you see this timeless tradition that is also prone to innovation? Where do you see maybe some of the things that that we're considering now in the current moment as education changes and lots of things around us are impacting, especially Jesuit education right here in the United States?
Yeah, I'm fond of using two words, always and forward, right? So always, not always forward, but always period, forward period. And the reason why I say that there are those things that are timeless and those things that are mission driven and bedrocks of who we are. And part of this is we've talked about today, which is this openness of context, a clear-eyed looking of the current context of what is, while still saying that we are grounded in those core values that I talked about, and really the important things that we serve, the apostolic preferences of the Society of Jesus, the quest for social justice and love. Those are grounding to us. But forward too is that we can't see the world as we wish it to be. We see the world of what it is. And then we see how we as an institution needs to face the challenges of the world today. And then my job is to lead us through that. And so part of that background is having that clear-eyed look of both of those clear-eyed look of the values and the look of what we need to do. When I was searching for a job as a provost, as that's how I first came to St. Joseph's University. I came from another Jesuit university with over 30 years experience there. I was only looking at Jesuit universities, and I only wanted to be a provost or a president at a Jesuit university because I believe that closely and that strongly about how we do the work.
No, I appreciate that, absolutely. And of course, as you said, it's this openness to new learning, because that allows us also to figure out how maybe we can, in new ways, continue to affect and in fact transform the world for what it needs to be. I don't know, Tom, if you have any examples of how we can innovate and how we can learn in new ways.
I was just thinking about this because yesterday in class, or Monday, when I was using this book and my notes, very old materials, one of the things we were doing, because Shakespeare is hard, I said to the kids, I said, all right, we want to find lines that are hard in Shakespeare. And I said, don't worry, you'll find plenty of them. And if you're having a hard time, you should be. And they did. And then I said, the assignment for a pre-writing exercise for them is read it, see if you can figure out what it means. Then, and I gave a blanket permission, which I require in this class, I said, put it into AI and see what happens. And I did the assignment with them myself. And what we found was really interesting, because on the one hand, when AI got it part right and AI got it part wrong, and I was able to say, we were able to take some very old material here that I had about what got passed on to me from my notes, and I actually put it in what I wrote. And then I said, let's see what AI did with this. And it was really interesting to me to see how the new and the old kind of came there together. And of course, our kids are very aware of this technology, much more so than I am. But I think that learning to use it, and I know this is a big thing of yours, is learning to use it ethically has to be one of our goals here. And that takes time and work. That is a very complicated business. And I think it's something that all the disciplines here, we just have to be engaging with. And I think the Jesuits, rightly, this is something that we come into now. I can multiply the examples of this sort of thing, of where the culture, I've had to meet the culture in a lot of different ways in class. And I think if you're not doing that in these classes now, particularly in required classes or classes, which I teach a lot of, you're not going to you're not going to meet the student.
Well, I do appreciate too that it's that way in which we engage students and allow them to also figure out how they have their own gifts and tools that they can do this and they can learn it, and then they become their own self-teachers. Really, they live a life of constantly learning and constantly being able to grow and develop. And that happens, of course, in the classroom. It happens outside the classroom too, of course, here at St. Joseph's, where there's all kinds of other opportunities that are very important to Jesuit education, that in addition to the classroom, we also have things that students can choose to grow in whatever their interest is and to grow personally. Lots of leadership development opportunities, lots of ways in which they can experiment and come to know more deeply their own capacity for that kind of growth. And I think that's what Jesuit education at its most essential is looking for. The spiritual exercise of St. Ignatius set up a process of really what St. Ignatius called learning from one's own heart. That God works through us and in the world, and we can learn from within to be that self-guided person who depends on God's grace, but also on our own gifts and abilities that God gives us, so that we can step into the world and be actors, decision makers, discerners, ethical leaders that allow us then, each of us, to be the fullest person we can be. And that's pretty essential to what is a Jesuit education. I would say, as we were sharing in the different aspects from our work in Jesuit education, and you have a lot of years experience right here, that I think that's the basics of what the purpose of this education is. And hopefully, as we continue to learn more about this education and how it works for each of us in our own way, we'll come to see its giftedness and its opportunity. So thanks for being with us for Jesuit 101 as we explore more deeply the mission of St. Joseph's University. Thanks.
Thanks all.